Keep Up the Fire, The Boxer Rebellion. This is the deluxe edition of a State of Siege game that came out a couple of years ago for Victory Point Games, and I played and reviewed the original edition. Now I played and reviewed this one. If you're pressed for time, I enjoyed the original game, and as a game I enjoyed this one also. On top of that, now you have a professionally printed edition that looks a lot better. So the same nuance and compelling game of the original edition with better components. What's not to love? And you know me, if you watch my videos, I love State of Siege games, also some of the first games that I reviewed, so they have that, there's a sentimental value there. Keep Up the Fight, The Boxer Rebellion is a solitaire game about, well, the Boxer Rebellion. You can also play solitaire with, you can play solitaire, that's the main mode. You can also play cooperative simply by sharing decisions with other players. Now, the topic is we are controlling a number of Western legations that are trying to survive attacks from Boxer groups and from Qing armies that will come along these tracks in State of Siege fashion. And there are just so many ways in which it can inflict a lot of pain and destruction on us. In the State of Siege system, this is definitely one of the more involved games, with more game effects, more stats to track, but it's all worth it because the trade-off is that you have, again, more nuanced, more sophisticated gameplay. For example, a lot of State of Siege games, you will lose simply if an enemy troop moves into the central space, which still applies here, still true. But there's more nuance when it comes to the locations. Again, in many State of Siege games, the locations are simply numerical. Other than the number and position, they are neutral spaces on a track. Here, different locations have different effects and different modifiers. For example, it's hard to hit enemies that are at extreme range. If you're fighting in melee next to the walls, there are going to be fewer casualties for you, for the legations, because I guess you're throwing stuff on their head. Fighting in the streets closer to the central area causes more damage, and also if there are 3 enemies fighting in the streets next to the central space, that is enough to lose you the game. So you lose the game if they get in the central space or too close to it. Also, your legations, they have unique game pieces. So the Japanese legation is different from the Russian legation, which is different from the Italian legation, and they have different effects as indicated on their tokens. The Italians are not very good to hit at a distance, and also they have different strength. When they take hits, simply you move their tokens down, and if the token goes all the way down to 0 health points, so to speak, then the corresponding legation is removed from the board. So a lot more detail, which also means, again, a lot more decisions and strategy than in a lot of other games. If all of your legations are annihilated, that also is a way in which you lose the game. Finally, this is more typical to other Victory Point games, State of Siege games, in which if it takes you too long to achieve the victory condition, if you go through all of this deck of event cards and you have not achieved the victory condition, then you lose the game. But what is a victory condition? Thank you for asking. While our legations are trying to survive those attacks, the State of Siege there, and there is a relief army that is coming, but it has also its own problems as it has to fight its way to Beijing. So you have basically a main game and a mini game with 2 separate decks of event cards. Each turn you're going to take a main turn, and then there's a shorter, smaller turn that takes place here, in which you will determine whether or not and by how much this token advances. If it reaches the end of that track, if it reaches the Beijing space before any of those losing the game conditions apply, then that's how you win the game. You need to survive until the relief column arrives. That also means you need to play actions and make decisions so that the relief column can indeed arrive. So, similar to other States of Siege game, you start by drawing a card from a deck of event cards that needs to be set up in a specific way. But the general idea is that these cards will have a display here indicating which enemy troops, if any, need to be added to the tracks on the board. In this case here, for example, and we're at the beginning of the rebellion, we are told that a boxer unit, as indicated by that red symbol, will be added to the northern track. A yellow symbol means a Qing army. So we're gonna add a boxer unit to the extreme range of the northern track there, and we're gonna set its strength to 4 because that's the number indicated there. So each enemy has a changing value, a changing strength that you need to reduce to 0 to remove them. Then we're gonna add a 4 strength boxer unit to the east and a 4 strength boxer unit to the track on the south, and again we're gonna mark their strength that way. If you draw a card and there already are enemies on that track, then you ignore those tracks. So if this is the next card we're gonna draw and this is the situation, we only need to add a 6 strength Qing army to this board here. So that's how you resolve this display here. The number in the middle is the number of actions that you have, and then the rest of the card will tell you about other special effects that may apply. So add new enemies if applicable to the board, then take effects into account, and then you finally resolve your actions. Your main actions will be to attack the enemies and or to fortify. Basically, you can spend an action to increase the fortification level on the board, and when you do so, well, you then will be able, when you should take casualties, to remove fortification points instead. So these are life points that you're banking for later. When it comes to, and the cards may give you other ways of spending actions, but when it comes to what happens here, a lot of what you're going to do is going to be to attack. Hooray! And you can attack in 2 ways. If the enemy is like extreme or long range, you're gonna use fire combat. If the enemy is on the walls or in the streets, you're gonna use melee combat. Fire combat, you're gonna have 2 rolls. One to see if you hit, and then one to see how much damage you cause. In melee, you only roll for damage. Somebody's gonna get bruised. That's the way it works. Again, you will recognize the similarities of the main combat system with other games in the system, because when you fire, you roll a die, and you're trying, and after applying modifiers, super important, you're gonna try to match or to exceed the strength of the opponent. If you're able to do so, then that is a hit. And then you roll another die to determine how much damage you do. Suppose I did hit them and I give them a damage, then I roll a die, give them 2 points of damage. Now, not only are they closer to be eliminated, but they're also easier to hit in following rounds. And what really makes this game stand out, what makes it different, is simply the amount and kind and type of modifiers that you get, because they come from so many things, and it may feel a bit confusing at the beginning, but it works very well. It's very thematic. Say, for example, the boxers, I guess, are really very brutal, and so they're gonna generate more casualties. However, rolling at extreme range causes less casualties, but again, less casualties here. Melee, as we said, if you're attacking somebody melee, then you simply roll for the damage, and again you apply modifiers. Again, modifiers based on who your enemy is and where the enemy is. For example, melee on this wall reduces casualties for delegation by 1, but this wall is better because it reduces legation casualties by 2. The units themselves, the different legations, do not all act the same. And so, for example, the Brits are very good at inflicting casualties on the opponents, the French are hitting a long range, and some are not. Some will actually be pretty reckless because they cause extra damage on the legations. So, when you're attacking a long distance, see if you hit and then roll to determine how much damage. More modifiers. The current strength of the enemies may cause modifiers on the numbers to hit and or the casualties. So yes, you do have to take a lot of stuff into account, but it's all good. It's all in good fun. So, roll the dice when you're attacking a long range and or casualty and apply casualties to them, hopefully, but again, when it comes to melee, you will also have to apply casualties to your units, and as we said, it may be bad enough that in fact some of these units may be eliminated after a while. Then, of course, in the rest of the turn, you'll get a chance to move your legation, so that you're planning, okay, these people are gonna move there next turn, so I really want to have my melee people ready to fight them, and then the shooting people maybe where there will be enemies at long range. So you're trying to take into account what the legations can do and also how alive they still are. So you're going to move your legations around after all is said and done. Then all enemies on the tracks will move closer to the heart of the situation. And that pretty much completes after the Chinese advance and the legation movement, that completes the main phase on this board. And then we're going to move to the other mini board where we're going to draw a card from this event deck, which is going to tell us how many actions we're gonna get. Basically, each turn the enemies will launch a new army to try to stop our advance. You will draw a token from a pool. You're gonna have a cup. It's gonna be look a lot more professional than mine present cup. Draw a token from there. Oh, that's the enemy that's attacking me this turn. And the composition of enemy tokens in the cup will change as the game progresses. Tougher armies will appear. So you will have a token on you, and basically if you want to advance on that track, again, you need to roll a die and roll high enough to beat their strength. If you attack and you beat their strength, then they're dispersed for now, which gives you a chance of trying to move. In which case, if you're trying to move, you are gonna roll a die and you need to roll greater than 6 to advance. That doesn't seem all that easy on a 6-sided die, and that's where you have modifiers. Basically, these actions indicated here, you can spend them to increase your bonus on the speed track. Oh, I spent 2 actions, now I have a bonus of +1 on speed, +2. Now the chances of rolling higher than 6 are almost decent. You can also spend actions to increase these tracks. Same idea, 1 action per space, and from time to time that will generate bonuses. Oh, now +3 in combat, that's not bad. So, they'll try to stop you by default. From time to time, they will actually and actively attack the relief column as indicated by the event card. But out that you're going to spend a lot of actions building up your bonuses in speed and combat, and then finally try to advance. I find that the movement here is not like a fluid one. It's like you're building up, pushing through, take some damage, and damage on this board is recorded by losing modifiers, build up your power again, big push again, and so on and so forth. And hopefully you'll be able to, in your turn, so if you have 2 actions, either you're going to build up your modifiers, or you're going to spend the first one to try to disperse the enemy, attacking them successfully, and then you're going to roll hoping to move successfully. And then you have red spaces there that are even more dangerous than usual. They give you more damage if you fail to move. So this is the general idea. I know it sounds like a lot, and it definitely is more than most other State of Siege games, but it is a game that gives, again, more decisions, more theme, more nuance than a lot of other games in the system. So Keep Up the Fire, definitely more complex and more demanding to set up and to play than a lot of other similar games in the same system, but totally worth it, totally rewarding. And also, mind you, still a lot simpler to play and to set up and faster to play than a lot of war games out there. So still definitely within the war game category, a very light one within the parameters of almost everybody else playing games, maybe middleweight game. So Keep Up the Fire. It has all the good stuff of States of Siege games, which means they're soloable. You can play them whenever you want. They have a lot of theme, a lot of story, a lot of history. Well, both. They have the history, which is right there in how the historical factors have been ingrained within the mechanics. You have the flavor text. You're going to learn about the historical event, of course. So there is history, and there's also story in the sense that there's going to be a certain architecture, which is similarly to other States of Siege game, a survival kind of thing, attrition. Almost almost feels like a slasher movie, because you literally will see your number of people fighting for you going down and being diminished. In other States of Siege games, the reduction of your strength or your capability is more abstracted. Here, they leave the board. They're not there anymore. Not giving you those bonuses, sometimes not giving you those penalties. So maybe there are some of those that don't need to be there all the time, that you can use a little bit more as a human target. But definitely there is a strong narrative architecture as you're trying to move the column, as you're seeing your forces like hanging by a thread and being reduced, and these enemies keep coming and keep coming and keep coming. It sure is also very satisfying to reduce an enemy and when they are at a longer range, and then inflicting the final damage, especially if it's on a location where you can use the modifiers and they get removed from the board and your legations don't take damage, which is not super common, but it's definitely satisfying. So basically, you have the advantages of a fairly abstract core, which is the State of Siege system, but with this extra theme, extra nuance, and extra mechanics that just give more a three-dimensional experience, more of a intimate, I don't know if that's the feeling, if that's the word, visceral experience. You feel more like being there. In that sense, I guess just when you have a tactical scale, that's more common. So it's more akin to, again, the feel that you have in Zulus on the Rampart, for example, again, speaking about games in the same system. So it's very gripping, it's very there. It's very there, I mean, there in the sense of like very immersive. It's a very strong sense of time and place. As for the column, again, a mistake may be to try to move it too soon and too fast, to see, I'm going to build it up a little bit, move it a little bit, build up a little bit, move it a little bit. But when you try to move and you try to do something, you fail to do so, that eats up your bonuses. So one thing about the sideboard is maybe a good idea to build up a little bit and then go for the big push and then rebuild it again, etc, etc, etc. And even then, it's about waiting for the right opportunity. Maybe I'm gonna wait one more turn, hoping that the next army trying to block me is a little weaker than this one. So there are decisions to be made there also. It's definitely an unusual solution here to have 2 decks and 2 boards, but the second one, well, definitely ancillary. Doesn't feel like unnecessary, doesn't feel like pasted on. There is a lot of tension there, because ultimately that is the one that will give you victory. So not as much happens on the secondary board as on the main one, but it's so important that it's still very, very fun and very interesting, and definitely adds to the sense of complexity. That's what I was trying to say, I believe. This game may have more complicated procedures than a lot of other games in the system, but the trade-off is a lot of good complexity, the good kind of complexity that gives you an interesting, nuanced event with a lot of moving parts that yet all come together well, all make sense, and all make for a very exciting, very fun experience. So high praise from me for Keep Up the Fire. I enjoyed the first edition. Here the experience seems very similar to the one that I recall, but with much better components, so what's not to love?